who remembers this? About a year ago, I made this little rat sewer diorama inside an actual 3-inch drain line. It's a pretty cool idea, I think. When I was making it, I was very close to just getting something really awesome. But I kind of had a disaster when I poured the resin and just about ruined the project. I did persevere and managed to finish it and, save it, but it's always bugged me. So close yet so far. Since Archvillain this month is doing rats again, figured it's time to redeem myself. I started this project out right with a really high quality print. I got myself a frozen 8K mini, and a couple of these big rat boys were my first print. They came out friggin' mint. And this was before I even dialed in my settings. Not only has the machine been printing basically without fail, the quality is unlike anything I've seen before. And the 8K aqua resin that it uses is great. I won't say it's indestructible, but it's as close as I think you're gonna get with resin, at least for now. It has an amazing amount of flexibility. I wanted to do this diorama right, so I put in some good effort into painting it nicely. It wasn't a crazy week-long paint project or anything, but I was patient and spent the better part of a full day making it as nice as I could within my skill set. I've got a pretty big reserve of techniques and tools to lean on at this point, which greatly compensate for my intermediate painting skill. And honestly, I've gotten my mini painting to a point that I'm happy with. For tabletop use, I think what I can do is fantastic. And for dioramas, I think it's just at the point of being good enough to actually justify sticking a mini in a display piece. Of course, the display piece itself, the actual scene, is almost always going to be the focus of my dioramas, not the mini, because that's where my skill set and interests really shine. Crafting the little world is what gets me excited. I wasn't exactly sure when I started cutting what the scene would be. I just knew that I wanted it to be a sewer, and I knew I wanted the piece to be more open. As cool as that toilet pipe was to make a diorama in, it wasn't ideal for a display, and it was an absolute pain to work in. This time around, I wanted to go with a bit more of a traditional vignette with a base and a background that would allow me much better access while working. My first attempt at making the stone archway did not go very well. I didn't get it quite right in terms of fit, and it quickly broke on me. So I do what I always do when I fail at something. I immediately move on to trying a different approach. Using some foam bricks that I had cut previously, I got to work on the tedious task of cutting the little angles and placing them into the arch. In the end, this looked so much better than my first attempt would have, even if it had worked. This is why you should never be afraid of failing or upset when something doesn't work out. Your second attempt will often be a better idea as you approach the task with more experience and perspective. With that problem solved, the rest of the foam build went on without issue. I wanted to ensure that this piece looked polished and finished. I didn't want it to have any unsightly, ugly, rough outside edges. I grabbed some black chipboard and took my time applying it to each side, getting the cuts and the fit as nice as I could. I super glued the joints, then filled them with some modeling paste. After that dried, I could sand them smooth and was able to make the seams disappear. I don't coat my foam build with Mod Podge very often anymore, but whenever I'm using a paper product like this chipboard, I still use it to seal the paper. This will make it harder, but it's also gonna make sure that during the painting process, it won't absorb any moisture and cause issue. And since I had it out already, I did go ahead and coat the foam too. It didn't really need it, but it was a good idea to seal the joint between the foam and the chipboard, making sure that stuff like paint and resins couldn't seep in between them later. This piece was coming together nicely, but it was looking a bit plain. I sorted through various bits boxes and found a few elements that I thought would really fit the scene. I don't know what it is, but I find there is something magical about finding the perfect bit and hacking it up to make it fit as though it was meant to be there. In some ways, I find this process more fulfilling than making something from scratch. Not exactly sure why, it's just really satisfying for me. Now that the build itself is done, and just needs a bit of primer, let's pause to talk about this week's sponsor. Arch Villain Games are one of my favorite 3D model providers, and are huge supporters of this channel. Every month they bring out a themed set of amazingly detailed and dynamically posed models that you can print at home. The models are pre-supported, and they have a wonderful community of helpful people to make sure your printing process is a success. The theme this month is rats. What I love about Arch Villain is how they walk this fine line between models for RPGs and war games. You got some kind of rat-themed warband or army in a game you play? Well, here are some unique proxies to make your army really stand out. You're running a D&D campaign and your players have entered the sewers of the city to try and gain access to a secure building? Well, that game session would be a lot cooler if they had to face off against some sick, heavily armored rat folk. And if you want to run a session using the models but don't feel like making something up, use the included module each month. If you just want to paint, well then put your effort into one model and enter it into the monthly painting contest that they host. And maybe you'll win one of the great prizes. Why join a subscription service for model files though? Well, because it's a hella good deal. It's the most cost-effective way to get printable files. And the best part is that you'll have your models available for life. Print as many as you want, whenever you want. I'll put a link in the description so you can join up for yourself. The airbrush and airbrush primer was again an absolute champ on this piece. Getting inside that sewer tunnel with a rattle can or even a paintbrush would have been a nightmare. I wanted the backdrop of the scene to have a somewhat vibrant look. I wanted it to contrast the rat model, which was mostly brown. This meant I couldn't go for a dingy brown sewer, which would be more realistic. Instead, I aimed for kind of a comic style effect using some purple and lots of greens and yellows. It looked okay, but it was a lot more muted than I actually wanted. Rather than trying to build up more vibrancy with inks, I opted to use dry brushing with like 6 shades of green to bring up the saturation and add a little bit more depth to the piece so that it didn't look like one homogeneous green stone. And I gotta say, this dry brushing just with craft paint turned out better than I expected. I'm very happy with how this green stone looks. I've tried to do this kind of color scheme a few times before. I think this is the first time I got it right. For the metallics, I also took a dry brush approach. And since the dry brush didn't like completely cover some of the green inks that they were still visible, it made for a very rich and complex layered look. Again, really happy with this. I built up some grime and shadows with contrast paint. While that dried, I painted some rats and I added those to the scene. It was looking awesome, but could look even better with an application of some dirty down rust and moss. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, this stuff is magic in a bottle. And since I know you'll ask, there will be a link in the description. And no, I don't have any kind of affiliate commission set up with them. I just love this product. All right, here's where things get dicey. The resin. Avid viewers of this channel know that water effects are my kryptonite. I don't know what it is. I just seem to fail more with them than I succeed. It was really important to me that I didn't fail this time. Not just because I had already built a piece that I really liked and didn't want to ruin, but for me, this was a redemption piece. I had to get it right. I hit up Michael's at 9 a.m. and bought some Easy Cast. This is a very reliable resin that can take additives without much issue. I used packing tape to create a dam for the pour. Now this was a little bit risky. Tuck tape is safer as it's stickier, but I wanted to be able to see through the tape to see what I was doing. So I took a small calculated risk here, but I made sure that that tape was stuck on really well before pouring. And when it came time to mix the resin, things of course started to go south. This is a simple 1-to-1 ratio mix, but you know what I didn't have? Clear mixing cups. Somehow I was completely out. I literally only had 2 paper cups left in my supplies. These are not ideal for mixing as they are not see-through, so you can't see the levels of your pours to make sure they're equal. A scale is the solution to this problem. But my scale was acting up. It was being really sketchy and I didn't trust it. So what the hell am I gonna do? Well, I very carefully poured my 2 parts of resin into these paper cups, and using my very bright studio lights, I was just able to see the resin levels through the paper to get them equal. I added a tiny bit of brown and green wash to the mix. I mean a tiny amount at a time. One other way that I've messed up resin on projects in the past is by tinting them too much, making them opaque. I made sure not to do that here. Just wanted the teensiest, tiniest bit of color to make the water look a little bit dirty. I poured and I hoped for the best. I tried to pop some of the bubbles with heat, but got nervous that I'd set the whole thing on fire or like melt some of the parts by accident. So I didn't try that for very long and instead put my faith in the slow curing resin to get most of the bubbles out naturally. And you know what I did immediately after pouring that? I went online to make sure I'd never have this problem with not having mixing cups again. This is 1,000. The next morning was the moment of truth. And lo and behold, everything looked perfect. Just needed to get the tape off without damaging anything. I was relieved that this worked out. In fact, the pour was so nice and clean that it looked too perfect. It needed just a little bit of ripple on top. A classic model railroad technique is just to put on some clear Mod Podge and then spray it with an airbrush, making some nice ripples. Then all that was left to do was put my big old rat boy in his forever home. Wow, I feel so good about this project. I'm happy with every aspect of it. There's nothing bugging me, no regrets. Sure, in time, my skills and knowledge will improve, and I'll look back on this and think, oh, maybe I could have done this a little bit differently or better. But I won't regret anything, because this piece was built as well as I could with my abilities at the time. And that's what's important. We're always gonna get better at things. So old projects might not look as good in the future, but what matters is that we did the best we could when we made them. And in this sense, I think I did. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was a blast to make. Some of you are saying, why don't you have a light in there? Well, because you can also just put a light behind it. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and let me know in the comments section below. If you want to pick up some tools or supplies for your own hobby needs and support the channel in the process, check out blackmagiccraft.ca. There I have my essential equipment page where I link to a lot of the stuff I use regularly. If you get a lot of value out of these videos I make and you want to help me keep making them, the best way you can do that is by supporting the channel on Patreon. I'd love to have you as the newest member of the Blackmagic Craft Fellowship. That's it, that's all. See you again next video. This is so much better than this one. Although this one's still pretty cool.